Good morning. If this is your first time here, I want to thank you for getting up and getting dressed and coming to worship with us. I want to thank Jacob and Crystal Young for sitting so close to the front this morning. Okay. Somebody got your spot. How dare they? They must not be good Baptists. All right. If you've got your Bibles, open with me to the place where I should not have to tell you. If you haven't been here, you haven't joined us in a while, we're in the book of Philippians. We have been in the book of Philippians, and we will be in the book of Philippians. If you're not sure where Philippians is, then look in the table of contents. If you're not sure where that is, ask the nearest deacon. The book of Philippians. Guys, I was only kidding. I have a special called business meeting this afternoon and deal with the pastor. The book of Philippians, chapter 3. The book of Philippians, chapter 3. Who in here, do we have anybody here that was in school during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Let me see your hands. Anybody in here? Did you guys really practice getting up under your desk during that time? During elementary school? You really did? Okay. So if I just throw out the word enemy, does anybody here go back to the Russians and the Cubans, or the word enemy, you kind of picture the hammer and the sickle and that kind of pictures? Are those enemies to anybody in here? If I just say the word enemy, does that strike you? Okay, all right. What about if I say the word enemy? Does anybody in here think of somebody, and I don't mean to, this is not a racial stereotype, this is just the way we function as a culture. Does anybody in here think of anybody with a head-wrapped turban on? If I say enemy, you picture somebody probably of Middle Eastern descent with a head-wrapped turban on. Anybody? That's what you think of an enemy? Okay. Does anybody in here, probably in your mid to early 30s, if I say the words, this is going to be an inside joke. If you get it, you can laugh. If you don't, just roll with it. If I say the words Cobra Kai, does anybody in here know what I'm talking about? And does anybody, do y'all remember that movie, Karate Kid? All right, and Danielson up in this picture right here, and Billy rushes at him, and he just, right in the nose. Y'all don't get it. I'm sorry. All right. Cobra Kai was the evil dojo, and that it's a moment of my childhood. I apologize. Enemies, whether they're turban, and for very good reasons, by the way. I say the word enemy, and you think of the Islamic State, you think of ISIS, killing hundreds and thousands of people, many of whom are Christians, and they will kill them simply because they're Christians. I think of enemy, and you think of the evil Russian Empire coming to blow us up with atomic bombs and turn us all into good communists. We get to Paul, and he's talking. He's telling us about these people who are enemies of the cross. And I hear that phrase, that these people exist as enemies of the cross, and I can't help it, y'all. My mind immediately goes to pictures of Muslims. Pictures from Nazi Germany and piles of Bibles being burned. But that's not the picture that Paul draws for us of enemies of the cross. And what I want to do this morning is I want to try and kind of disarm you, so that when you and I read this phrase in just a little bit, and you hear that word, enemies of the cross of Jesus Christ, you don't step back and go, oh, those must be terrible people, these enemies of the cross. They must be people who wave Nazi flags and they're out to kill Christians of all kinds. I want you to understand that these enemies of the cross that Paul is talking about, they look very much like you and I. And I would ask you to maybe draw inward to yourself a little bit. Because an incredibly dangerous passage said that these people who are enemies of the cross of Jesus Christ, they're very much part of the church. Not the real church and the true church, but the corporate gathering of people. But their heart is different. And if in 35 to 40 minutes you find yourself guilty of some of this, and you realize that as Paul describes, enemies of Jesus Christ, enemies of the cross, and you think to yourself right now, there's no way I'm an enemy of Jesus. And you look in just a minute and you see, you know what, Jason? When he describes an enemy of the cross of Christ, he's actually describing a characteristic that I find in myself. I want you to understand, this is not some country redneck boy preaching at you. This is me encouraging you and telling you that the entire gospel of Jesus Christ doesn't mean to condemn you as an enemy of the cross, but it is to offer you the cross of Jesus Christ. And so I pray that this morning we would all kind of take spiritual inventory of our souls and say, where am I? Even though the majority of me loves Jesus Christ, where are there harbors? Where are there these little sanctuaries within my own soul who harbors sin and still stands up against Jesus? So we're in Philippians chapter 3. Verse 17. Philippians chapter 3, verse 17. Brothers, stop right there. General Bible study tool. If Paul says brothers, who is he talking to? He's not talking to whoever said everyone, I love you. If you think he's talking about, he's not talking to every person that might possibly read this. He's talking to believers. Brothers and sisters, you could say, church members, Christians, join in imitating me and keep your eye on those who walk according to the example you have in us. Why is it important this morning, church, that we keep our eyes focused on where our eyes should be focused? Keep your eyes focused on this goal, namely Jesus Christ. Keep your eyes on righteousness. Keep your eyes where they're supposed to be, because I'm going to lose credibility and possibly lunch privileges. My wife is a fantastic person. You can't drive. She can drive and she drives well, but this is where my wife will struggle sometimes. My wife is so good at driving, she gets bored driving. And my wife will drive, and it's not enough that she drives while talking and putting on makeup. She also wants to see the countryside. So she will drive while talking on the phone and putting on makeup and be looking over here. Hey babe, did you see that house? I love what they did with their shutters. Meanwhile, I'm trying to climb out of the car. Because she lacks the ability to see out of her ears. And so her eyes are over here in this community, looking at how some of you have decorated your homes. She is continuing to drive. And I know what I'm going to hear as soon as this service is over, she's going to walk up and she's going to say, well, I never hit a bridge with a U-Haul. Okay? Cut it off, own it. It's mine. But we will visit white line to yellow line to white line to yellow line to the little things on the side of the road. Because her eyes are not where they're supposed to be. Her eyes are here, road here, eyes here, road here, car here. Yeah, no. It's called funeral preparation. But, church, I say we are guilty spiritually of the same thing. Have you ever asked yourself, why spiritually is my life here and here and here and here and here? Why is my walk not more firm? Why is my direction not more general and grounded towards Jesus Christ? It's because why? It's not because our eyes are where they're supposed to be. It's because our eyes are all over the place, and so our lives are all over the place. See it? So Paul comes along and says, my eyes are on Jesus. If you want to imitate me while my eyes are on Jesus, then we will all be walking the way that we're supposed to be walking because our focus is where it should be. We as a church have to make sure our focus is where it's supposed to be. And when that happens, then guess what happens to the direction of our church? It is where it is supposed to be. Guess what happens to the life of our church? It is the way it is supposed to be. Guess what happens to our individual lives when our focus is where it should be? The direction and the focus of our lives in general is where it should be. So, watch where you set your eyes this morning. He says, you imitate me because there are many people out there who are not careful with their eyes, and there are many people out there who are there things out there dying for your focus and attention. Look and see what he says in verse 18. For many of whom I have often told you, and now tell you even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. He says in the first 4 verses of chapter 3 that there are dogs. There are mutilators of the flesh. He says, like we talked about it just for a little bit last week, in 2 Timothy, that there are preachers who want to tickle your ears to lure you away from the doctrine that you were given. There are people out there that will preach a gospel, but it will not be the gospel which you have received. It will be a fake, a false, a dangerous gospel. Church, there are people, things, and there are demonic powers out there that are vying for your souls and your lives. And you know what's so scary for us? For the most part, they won't be wearing a turban. For the most part, they will look just like us. And so when Paul says that these enemies of the cross of Christ, what does that mean? What does that look like? He doesn't mean that you're on the lookout for the guy in the black suit with the black hat. He means this. Look and see what he says in verse 19. Their end is destruction. 3 qualifications, enemies of the cross. Number 1, your end is destruction. Their home is different than ours. Their destination is different. And if, much like the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, if you're not sure of your direction, if you don't know where you're going, then it doesn't really matter which way you go. If you care nothing about eternity, then guess how you're going to choose to live your life? As though eternity does not matter. And to quote the great evangelist Billy Graham, the single greatest missing concept in American preaching today is the preaching of the reality of hell. And so as much as we may want to look at people who are not like us, and as much as we may get discouraged as you try to share the gospel and we try to make disciples, and maybe even you invite people to this worship gathering and they tell you no, or they don't listen to the gospel, or they write you off as though your truth is not any truth whatsoever, we have to be reminded, and more than just reminded, church, listen to me, we have to be affected by the reality that their end is destruction. And so as we seek to make disciples and as we try to share the gospel with people, we're not trying to do this. We are not trying to do this. We are not trying to do this to make our church bigger. We're trying to do this to make the church bigger, because the opposite of the church growing bigger and stronger is that those people going to hell. And so these enemies of the cross, our first concern is not that they necessarily act just like we do as good Southern Baptists. Our first goal is that their eternal destination be changed from being in the presence of the wrath of God to being in the presence of the glory of God. That's the goal. Our goal is not to clean them up. Our goal is not so that their lives look like our lives. Y'all understand that? Our goal is not to keep their kids from getting tattoos. That's not the goal. Our goal is so that they learn to love Jesus Christ. Their end is destruction. Well, okay. Does that just happen? No. He says the next kind of qualification for an enemy of the cross is their God is their belly. I have to be real careful right here, because I learned a long time ago. I can preach on homosexuality and y'all will take me to lunch. I preach on gluttony. Nobody likes me. I find myself, though, in the position, right? I can make fun of deep Southern redneck. Do you know why I can make fun of deep Southern redneck? Because I are deep Southern redneck. I can kind of joke about needing to get a handle on our appetites. Guess why? Because I got a good appetite. Now, here's what you do need to know. You do need to know that I do not think the goal of Paul's writing right here is that their greatest struggles as enemies of the cross was that they were constantly feeding themselves. But I do want you to know that what Paul is talking about is that their God was to satisfy every sense of their physical being. Whatever makes me feel good physically, that's what I want to do. Because why? Their end is destruction. Their mind is somewhere else. Their eternal destination, they have no concern for. And if I have no concern for my eternal destination, guess what I get to do with this physical body? Whatever it wants to. I'm just going to, y'all, I'm inviting you to correct me when this sermon is over. I grew up listening to preachers who would share Jesus on an airplane and the whole airplane gets saved. They talked about sin as though it were an entirely different universe because they never did it. I'm not that preacher. Everybody that I talk to doesn't get saved. I struggle with real junk just like you do. And so I hesitate to use myself as a positive example. I changed the way I eat in March. I didn't do that because I necessarily wanted to look better. I did that because a spiritual reality came home to nest inside of me, and that was this. I realized that 1 Corinthians 9, buffeting my body so that my body becomes my servant, was not true of Jason Bowman. I realized with my appetite and how I was treating my body, I was serving my body. I was giving my body everything that it wanted. And for me, that meant sweet tea 24/7 and all the fat and the sugar and everything that I wanted, I gave my body. And that's not right. For your God to be your belly, 1 Corinthians 9, for us to buffet our body means this. God gave you this physical body so that this body serves you, not the other way around. So that this body becomes a servant of my kingdom. because my end is not destruction. Therefore, eternity does matter for me. Therefore, what I do with this body matters. And so I had to reel in my physical appetite. Now, for you, it may or may not have anything to do with what you eat. I'm certainly not going to preach on the evils of sugar. But what I am going to preach on is we, as members of heaven, as citizens of another kingdom, we have to understand that we should serve nothing but Jesus Christ, even at the dinner table. But this is so much bigger than food, isn't it? To flip that around, typically young ladies will struggle with this, but it's very possible for guys to struggle with this. For some of you, to not eat a pizza today would be an act of worship, and I mean that. God, I need to rein in control of my physical bodies. For some of you, you need to go eat a pizza, because your body is an idol for you, and you have made how you look physically the most important thing in your life. Go have a hamburger and worship. Because with some of us in this culture, we get so wrapped up in physical appearance. If you gained 3 or 4 pounds, you would lose your mind. And I just want to tell you that God doesn't want you to be unhealthy, but God doesn't care if you've got 2 or 3 pounds on you. You are serving your body just the other way. And if you're a young female, I just want to tell you that if you feel like you have to please another guy completely with your physical appearance, you don't need to be worried about that guy. Okay? But this gets bigger than food. For their God to be their belly meant whatever soothes my eyes, that's what I'm going to take into my body. Some of us need to really watch what we do with our televisions. Whatever appeases my hands, that's what I'm going to do. Watch how we spend our free time. Their God was their belly. Whatever satisfied their flesh, that's what they did. Folks, we have to understand our flesh is not going to last. Therefore, be careful with its desires. Their God is their belly. Our God is God. And their glory is their shame. I don't have to tell you, what does it mean for them to glory in their shame? What it meant for them was that there were people who were doing things physically. Nothing spiritual about it. They were doing things physically. They were having circumcisions. They were keeping all the food laws. They were keeping all the festivals. And they were saying that the food law and the circumcision and the festivals and Jesus, all this is getting me saved. Listen to me. There is no such thing as and Jesus. Jesus saves us. Jesus keeps us saved. Jesus sanctifies us, and it will be Jesus that glorifies us. It's really just Jesus. But these guys were adding so much stuff to Jesus that they were glorying in things that they should have been ashamed of. I cannot go anywhere without seeing a picture or hearing about Bruce-Caitlyn Jenner. ESPN named him the Athlete of the Year because he said, and I quote, "I've always been a female, just in a male's body. I can help y'all out with that real easy. If God made you a boy, He meant for you to be a boy. Now, the anatomy of it is something you need to talk to your parents about. But God did not make any of us and then go whoops. Okay? But we take something that I would argue is not right. I would argue is rooted in a fallen, sinful nature. When men deny how God made them and when women deny how God made them, I think that is wrong. But when we as a culture take that and we exalt that, that is exactly what Paul is talking about when he says they glory in their shame. And before you go so far as to say that's something that Hollywood deals with, do you remember your high school days? Because I sure do. Do you remember how usually the most popular kids and word spread the fastest among those who could get the drunkest on the weekends? Or was that just Hueytown? Y'all are looking at me like y'all don't have any. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? If you wanted to be the most popular in high school, all you had to do was get the most messed up on the weekends. Rebecca, don't do that. I'm just saying, everybody around you, and there are times when we all want to be known and we all want for people to understand who we are and to like us. God loves you when you're different. Junior, if you ever feel the need to party so that people in school will accept you, then be a nerd. Be by yourself. Even in this great church culture, it is so easy to get swept up in socially acceptable sins that everybody wants to gloss over. Church, let's be a people. Let's be a people who are shamed at what God hates and who glory in the things that God loves. And those are the markers of enemies of the cross. They seek constantly to satisfy their flesh, exalting in things that they should hang their head over because they think eternity really does not matter. But oh, church, things are so much different for you and I, verse 20. But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. 2 weeks ago, I spent at youth camp in Greenville, North Greenville College in South Carolina. I roomed with your youth pastor, Jordan Atnip. First of all, he sleeps with a bandana over his eyes. So to walk in a room and see him in his boxers with a bandana over his eyes, blowing on that blower thing, was hard for me to sleep the first night. We're two big fellas, by the way. We gave those mattresses all they could handle. You go into this little shower of a closet thing, and the shower curtain's falling, and it's at an old college dorm on top of that, and we have clothes everywhere. The smell. You know what I didn't do though? Could you imagine what it would have been like if I had gone in there and about Tuesday night maybe, we had been there 2 nights. Could you imagine if Jordan had come in there and I'd had on an apron and I was sweeping up beard hair and I was putting nice curtains on the window, the one window. And Jordan walked in and I put my arm around him and I go, "Do you like those? They're not really coral, they're kind of mandarin. But I thought they tied in with the mattresses really, really well. Now my red bed sheets are just gonna have to go, and we're going to need to incorporate some ruffles around here." No. I slept on a mattress with 7 springs on it. I piled my dirty clothes in one corner and my clean clothes were piled in another corner because come Friday morning at 7:30, I was out. They could have the beard hair. I wanted to go back to my home with my wife, my daughter, my coffee maker, my sheets, my couch, my refrigerator. Not Jordan. That was not my home. That was not my home, so I did not care to make it my home. Church, This is not your home. James says that we are vapor, here for a moment and gone the next. This planet, this world, these bodies, your family, none of this is home. Heaven's home. Be about the business of storing treasure in home. Be about the business of taking people home. Be about the business of concerning yourself with home, because this ain't it. And no more than I should have spent days and weeks and hundreds of dollars preparing a room that I would only going to be in for a week at the most. You and I should not spend ample time, energy, and resources making it our business to make the life here as comfortable and as pleasurable as possible, because we will not be here forever. This is our citizenship, our home, where we're going to be forever is in heaven, where Jesus is. Why? How do I do that, Jason? I'm not saying it's wrong to get involved in things here. We have to be involved in this life. You get wrapped up in Downtown Abbey. I know it's pronounced Downton. I just refuse to say that. Does that mean I've lost my focus? No. It's not bad to watch a football game. If I like college football, is that bad? No. The problem is that when you forget that those things are temporal, the things of heaven are eternal, that's where the problem comes in. So church, I want to ask us, can we please be consistently evaluating our lives individually and our lives as a church to make sure that our focus is in heaven, our glory is Jesus Christ, our God is God, and we are worried about things that will last? Can we do that? And I think that's impossible, by the way. I think we live as part of a culture that makes that near to impossible. But he closes out this thought by saying in verse 21, this Jesus Christ that we are waiting on will transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him to subject all things to himself. Therefore, my brothers, I want to stop right here because this is so pastoral of Paul. I understand absolutely what he is saying when he says, whom I love and I long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm in the Lord. Why? Because the Lord, look back at verse 21, the Lord is powerful and he is subjecting all things to himself. I want to make sure that as Jesus Christ brings things under his feet, we are already on our knees. You see in chapter 4, verse 1, when he says, my brothers whom I love and I long for, my joy and my crown, what Paul is communicating to you is this. It's not enough for me to stand up here and to try to communicate to you a biblical truth. That doesn't work for me. You know why it doesn't work for me? The same reason I'm trying to teach Addison good decision making. I think you have to teach children good decision making. I think if you leave children by themselves, they will eat chocolate cake for breakfast every day. And you can fuss at me later, by the way. You can ask Addison Bowman today. You can grab her and you can give her a French fry and you can say, Addison, what is this? And she will look at you and say, that's a bad carb, Daddy. You can give her a piece of broccoli, and she will say, that's a good carb, Daddy. You can give her a piece of bacon, and she will say, that's a protein. No kidding. You can show her a picture of butter, and she will say, that's a fat. But she will sit down in front of a bowl of chocolate ice cream and say, Daddy, this is a bad carb, and I'm going to eat it anyway. And she will get chocolate from here to here, and she will bottom out that bowl. I've gotten her to understand, and she knows the truth, but when it comes time to put it into play, most of the time, she is not willing to say, I know the truth, and I will then act on the truth. That's not enough for me as her father. I want her to know the truth and then to do the truth. And as much as I love my little girl, I love this church. And I want us not just to know the truth, that heaven is the only thing that's going to last. I want us to live the truth, that heaven is the only thing that's going to last. So when he says, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm. Church, your pastor says, I love you and I long for your growth in Jesus Christ, my joy and my crown. Can we please live what we know to be true? I want us to do it and not just know it. So Anthony and the guys are going to come sing. Please listen. I'm so. There are times I want to just completely blow the invitation up. And here's why. I'm not fussing at you. This is human. This is human nature. I say Anthony and the guys are going to come sing, and we all go. And when we do that, too often, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, we close the book, not just on our learning, but we close the book on the ideas that God has given us today. Don't do that. Don't do it. Don't walk out of here going, that was neat, that was funny, he talked about Jill, he's really in trouble. Because if this sermon today was about me, then it was a terrible sermon and it was fruitless. But if this morning God has moved in you to say, I have really, really lost my focus and I'm acting like the people whose end is destruction. God, help me. Stay there in that place. Maybe God has kind of pierced you or pricked you this morning and you're saying, Jason, you know what? This morning I understand that I know hundreds and thousands of biblical truths, but I am living little of them. And today I've been reminded that in order for us to be citizens of heaven, I've got to not just know truth, but live truth and love truth. This morning, say, God, would you please help me to live what I know? And so as we sing, this is a time for us to approach the throne of Jesus Christ saying, Jesus, would you please work in me with strength and grace so that I'm living out what I already know to be true. So they're going to sing. We're going to stand. As we do that, if you want to pray with somebody, that's fine. I'm not concerned ever that this altar be filled. I'm concerned that your hearts be right. So if you need to pray up here, I will pray with you. Other people will pray with you. This ultimately is about you doing business with God.
Let's stand.